Not normally solvable by radicals. The life of Evariste Galois, told backwards. Paris, June 1832. I suppose they thought that with the ringleaders arrested there'd be no chance of a riot, says one of the observers. I'd say they were right, says the man at his side. They watch along with the cowed crowds as the cheap-looking coffin is lowered into a ditch. Not a grave, no headstone or anything. His legacy won't be financial. His legacy starts with the tension in the air. How many people here? Asks the first speaker. Some thousands. And guards? Some thousands more. We're surrounded. Yes, and there'll be no riot. Not today. They are asked to shush as the first orator takes his place at the pit side, facing the multitudes. The first orator begins a speech telling of how the young man's death will be avenged. He offers a Republican history of the last quarter of a century, speaks of fanning embers and phoenixes and the like. How old was he? Asks the second bystander. Just 19, I heard. Shush, says a raggedy woman behind them. Now the first impassioned speaker has finished his funeral oration. Next, the second impassioned speaker lays out a theory of how the young man died. In a duel, yes, we all know about that. But who set the duel up? The impassioned speaker wants to know. They say it was over a woman. In that case, we must look to this woman's other lovers. In that case, we must look to this woman's other lovers. Naturally, and who should we find among them but a high-ranking army officer? And not any old officer, but one of the 19. What a coincidence. Oh yeah, the first bystander comments to his companion, trying to keep his voice down. I heard the duel he had was with his old cellmate, over politics. He refused the last rites once they'd dragged him from the field to the hospital, that's all I know, his colleague informs him. The woman behind them has lost her patience and hits the last speaker on the shoulder with her bag of walnuts. Meanwhile, the second impassioned speaker's voice has begun to drift over the open grave and over the heads of the mourners, over the heads of the politicos and of the Garde Nationale, who are still standing there, watching, rifles ready. However, surrounded or not, some of the crowd are becoming impassioned themselves now, what with so many impassioned speeches about. Maybe there will be a riot after all. 1 month before, May the 30th, 1832. The farmer is crossing the field at dawn when his dog runs off to have a sniff around at something. Come here, lass. The dog, usually obedient, takes no notice. The farmer, about to call the dog over again, looks over to where she's snuffling. He stops in his tracks. A dead animal. His dog will always run over to have a root around at a corpse. But this corpse is dressed in trousers, shoes and a coat. The body is lying among the cold, dew-tipped stalks of early morning grass. One side of him is red with the blood that has seeped through his coat. The dog is happy and excited to see she's made such an important discovery and runs in circles while her master approaches, awaiting a cue as to how next to behave. Mon Dieu, says the farmer and crosses himself, then immediately looks round to make sure no one has seen this thoughtless gesture. He bats the playful bitch away from the corpse and bends down to inspect it closer, but the panting canine comes back and they both peer down at the dead man's face. The dead man, who says in a feeble voice, "Help me." The farmer jumps back off his haunches and falls back into another patch of wet dew. He stands up, ponders what to do for a moment, then sets off running in the direction of the nearest house, with his dog bounding and barking behind him. The previous night, May the 29th, 1832. Given that, for all his radical talk, he's no use with a pistol, in fact he barely trusts the one he's been given, the young soldier mathematician thinks it a good idea to commit his thoughts to paper, in case this night should indeed be his last night on earth. He writes for hours into the blackest night, for once not the slightest bit concerned about how much of the candle he's using up, or how much brandy he will leave in the bottle. Brandy. And before that, rum. Why did he start drinking that poison? It had all started with the wine they'd forced down him in the prison. The idiots. Well, whether alcohol kills you or not is a moot point now, isn't it? Aged 20 and about to die. Letters to the comrades, letters to friends, and one to Chevalier, who will probably be the only one to understand the theories. I could not even get the modern professors to understand the cubics and the quartics, he scribbles. But the cubics and quartics are history now. Tartaglia attacked Cardano because Bombelli couldn't show how complex numbers can solve all cubics. Surely Chevalier will have the wit to see that once they explain it. And he begins frantically scribbling down his equations, graphs, and formulae. There seems to be too much to get down on these small scraps of paper. He thoughtlessly tells himself he can finish them tomorrow. So, he discovers in his deepest self, he still can't really believe he will not be here tomorrow. Who can picture the world we live in without us in it? And if we can, then, Lord, what does that say about us? On he writes, every so often pausing to fret, to think to himself, who will be able to carry on my work with quintics? Will it all go to waste? That seems a shame. That seems a lot of years' work for nothing. He tries to summarise it all as best he can for his mathematician friend. Lagrange holds the solution to the Cardano problem. Ferrari also gets cubics and quartics in terms of their roots. But he didn't study their composition, so he couldn't reach quintics or higher equations. And that's always been poor young Evariste's problem. Even his explanations leave much to be explained. See how he writes as if we're all familiar with these people, their thoughts, their disagreements. He stops writing for a moment. Candle flickers. There is no noise in the night. He gets down to it once again. Then came Ruffini. I ask again, has nobody seen this but me? Who saw that single permutations mean little? For greater information, we must study them in groups, and in doing so, what do we discover? What Ruffini almost discovered, that these problems, in general, cannot be solved by radicals. So that's all he has to say. He puts the pen down, leans back in his chair, and thinks to himself, if I am to die, at least let this insight be preserved. And please God, or whoever we rightly substitute for him, his ethical record hitherto has been poor, that Chevalier understands these scribblings enough to pass their meaning on, as I'm sure no one else will. And as the words and symbols he has just poured out into the paper run through his head again, the candle continues to burn down, and the clocks tick on. And though his mind is racing, his eyelids become heavy, and into his head comes that thought of Hegel's. The nature of finite things as such is to have the seed of passing away as their essential being. The hour of their birth is the hour of their death. 1 month earlier, the 29th of April, 1832. Well, that's very fucking kind of you, he says as he swings out of the prison door. Traitors to the revolution you are. You know that, of course, he says to the impassive guard who watches him walk through the iron door into the bright courtyard. Galois spits on the dusty floor at the soldier's feet. Still, the guard doesn't move. Just get to the end of this watch and there's a nice hot meal waiting for the guard at home. Why should he care? I'll be seeing you again in any case, he thinks to himself. These pathetic ex-crims. They all think they're going to lead the next revolution as soon as they get beyond these gates again. And as the sleepy guard thinks these thoughts to himself, off stomps Galois. His eyes hurt with the glare of the daylight and he screws them up. He's hunched and callow after so many months without clean air, but he doesn't want anybody to see this, so he straightens himself up as much as he can and begins to march. But where to? Well, that's a good question. Just as Napoleon thought last of his Josephine before dying, so Galois' thoughts turned to Stephanie. The revolution is important. Killing the king is important. But there's also this desire to see his Stephanie. He'll go there first. Rumours are she's become engaged to some bigwig, some soldier, some politician. We'll see about that. She liked me before, I know, and I'm handsome enough, even if Francois says I look deathly. Some 6 months earlier, October 1831. Francois is the one that has talked to him the most. And it wasn't him that forced the wine down his throat, that was the other lot. For this reason, Evariste trusts him. He's not dumb either, this revolutionary. When he talks to him about mathematics, this Francois seems to understand. Then the precocious youngster gets him to repeat it back to him in his own words. He knows about cubic equations, does Francois. There can't be many of them in here. And there's nothing better than maths to keep the mind occupied in the hours of boredom. So though with hardly any paper or pencil, he manages to expand the cubics through quartics to quintics and explain their mysteries. And in that happy way they spend hours together, sitting in their rags in the foul air. They discuss polynomials, but they also discuss politics, of course. They discuss what they will do when they get out. Francois even has the temerity to tell Evariste that once he's on the outside again, he has to calm down, for his own sake. A dangerous thing to say to Evariste, as anyone who knows Evariste will attest to. Once a day, for 1 hour, they are let outside the cell into a larger cell. Still not outdoors, but at least this one has small slits of windows high up in the walls, so some of the sunlight can creep in. You look rough, says Francois, now that I have some daylight to see you in. You look rough yourself, what do you expect? But seriously rough, youngster. Sunken cheeks, sunken eyes. And you? Hair falling out? Black teeth? You can say what you like about me. I am old, but for you to be in this condition... You don't worry about me. Some chicken soup and some milk when I get out of here, and I'll be right as rain. The old lag contemplates the young lag some more, then asks, How many times in prison now? So I've been in prison before, he replies. What does it matter? Prison time is a badge of honour. How many times? I told you. And you are how old? I am 20, monsieur. 20, he mulls this over. Young, he concludes. Still young. Not too young to fight, comrade. I didn't say that, Francois replies. I'm saying I think you're a waste. I'm a waste, am I? Well, you're no good to the revolution in here, are you? And you're only here because you're a fool. Why don't you learn to make yourself more useful and less visible? You think I have no self-control, says Evariste. Remind me of why you are here. Evariste looks at him and his lips curl into a smile. He knows why he's in here. For putting on his old, now prohibited, National Guard uniform and leading a protest with a gun and a sword in his hands. Right at the front there, weapons held high and lungs full of revolutionary air. Did you not expect them to arrest you? Francois asks, as Evariste has declined to reply to his earlier prompting. I do what I have to do. In full sight, says Francois. A revolutionary has to choose his moment. And that moment just happened to be Bastille Day. You think I'm a dangerous rogue element, is that it? Evariste challenges him with a glower to accompany his words. What I think, his colleague says, is that you're easy to rile. Too easy. In fact, if I wanted to bump you off, do you know what I'd do? I'd arrange for you to get into a quarrel with an officer and have him kill you legally in a duel. You work yourself up into a lather at the slightest contradiction. It will be that easy. And a duel means no legal inquiry. A duel sounds fair, doesn't it? To the people, I mean. A duel? Evariste looks at him. The thin strips of sunlight paint the upper reaches of the room. Small groups of prisoners sit around on benches or on the floor, some playing games with pebbles, scratching lines into the dirt, counting, pushing each other. Then, with no warning, a sudden crack! A hole appears in the wall right next to Evariste's head. A small cloud of dust is still hovering, and the cracks in the paintwork around the hole point to exactly where the bullet bounced off. It's missed the young revolutionary's cranium by 100 millionth of the distance from the equator to the North Pole according to the new standard measurements. Or a couple of hands in the old style. They look over at one of the old dogs who's lying on the floor clutching his arm. The bullet has bounced off the wall and made a direct hit on his elbow. The prisoners all spin round to the source of the noise. Evariste throws himself to the floor, François too, alongside him. Some of the other prisoners follow suit. Some simply press themselves against the walls. "That bullet was meant for me," Evariste hisses to his comrade still on the floor next to him. "Or me," says François. "No," says Evariste. "That one was mine." "Ah!" screams the old lag who's been hit. "Get him to the hospital! To a hospital!" some of them scream to the guards who've appeared at the door, muskets pointed out before them. But the guards don't react. They see what's happened and are afraid to come in. No one moves, no one speaks, only the groans of the victim are to be heard. After some time, when it seems no other bullet is to be expected, the guards creep along the walls to where the old man is wounded, and drag him up and off to the main door, looking fearfully around them as they do so. When they leave, the rest of the prisoners gradually get up again. No one wants to be near where the bullet hit the wall or anywhere near the centre of the large room. They mumble to each other sullenly until another guard comes to take them all back to their respective dungeons. Almost 1 year earlier, the 9th of May, 1831. Perched on the seat of the chair, the young man surveys the guests at the banquet. A silence has fallen among them as they expect a speech, and a good one. "Some 6 months ago now," he proclaims, "the National Guard was banned due to the cowardice of our supposed monarch, Louis Philippe." The young man looks at them all, most of them drunk by now. He does not approve, but knows that when they are in this state they are malleable. He has their attention. He's made some kind of name for himself. 19, he continues, and I refer not to my age. Laughter. No, they know to what he is referring. The 19 with a capital T and a capital N. 19 of the bravest officers charged with conspiracy. Some boos, some laughs. But now they're free, because sometimes, comrades, liberty wins. Loud cheers. Yes, they're all pretty soused by now. What does this mean to us, the revolutionaries? Well, apparently, he emphasises, apparently, then stops as his eye alights on a distant corner of the room. Good Lord, thinks Evariste to himself, is that pompous pen-pusher Dumas? Well, who else would be taking notes here? He fancies himself as the chronicler of our times. Right then, I'll give him something to chronicle. Apparently, he soldiers on, we are now all to be grateful to the great Pearhead. Write that down in your notebook. And of course we are. Grateful that he has shown us his weakness. Grateful that he has shown us that if he thinks that if he throws us a sop, we will eat it. And we will say, with this act, all injustice is undone. That's what we will say. He thinks. Now there is silence. There might be a future for him in this speech-giving lark, he's thinking. Let's see how far we can stretch this. Grateful that we are here to herald the demise of the last French king, and for that we say, he raises his glass, Vive le roi! But now, with the glass held high, we see he clutches a dagger against the glass. Then he brings his other hand high. In this one, he holds a pistol. He looks over to where Monsieur Dumas is scribbling away like fury. And again, Vive Louis Philippe, la tête du poire. The previous summer, the 28th of July, 1830. They laugh at my solutions. They lose my proofs. What have I got to lose? Go on then, Evariste, some of the boys encourage him. They can't understand my theorems even when I spell them out. They're idiots. Yeah, you go on there. Evariste is sitting at his desk with a sheet of paper spread before him. Evariste dips his pen in the inkwell and begins, Monsieur Directeur, without as much as a cher. And so begins the letter. It's the second day of uprising, and the students can only follow the events from the windows of their dormitories, safely high up, safely grilled in in their school prison. When the directeur decided to close up the school, literally, with chains and bolts, the boys were furious. "They treat us like boys when we are men," Evariste had shouted, and the boys had agreed. He discovered then that anger gave him a great fluency of speech, that if he spoke eloquently, people listened. Now he's scratching that eloquence down on paper. The other boys suggest words he can use. The sentences flow in the best style of Robespierre before he turned. This will be the start of his career, he feels. Politics is calling him. The nerve of it, one of his classmates opines, to have us cooped up in here while history's being made. In our name, we should be out there in the streets fighting with them. Down with the king! He's not even a real king. And every now and then, some of the boys at the dorm windows run to the classroom to say what's been happening. They saw guns going off on the other side of the square. There's a barricade on the corner of the diagonal street, and in the midst of the chaos, the mathematician writes on. Purple prose, defiant, self-assured, accusing. The previous year, August 1829. All eyes are on the priest as he scatters the earth onto the coffin lid. Ashes to ashes, he recites, dust to dust, and the first clods of earth hit the top of the cheap coffin. The mourners are sad, but more than sad, resentful, and with a resentfulness that cannot easily be contained. As the priest drones on, glances are exchanged, brows are furrowed, and feet are shuffled. And after some more Bible nonsense, one of the crowd says what all of them are thinking. "You have no room to talk, Father." "What's that?" "You shouldn't even be here, you're a hypocrite." The crowd murmur their approval, and the priest tries to stand tall as he weighs up the situation. "No, you have this all wrong," he shouts. "There's nothing we got wrong," another voice shouts. And suddenly there is a tumult of voices. There was a time, before the upset of the natural order, that no one would have dared lay hands on a priest. But now that they are supposed to live together in the same villages with the revolutionaries who wanted them guillotined, well, now the clergy have a real fear, and the priest and his small group of church helpers know they are about to come off the worse. "Blasphemer, putain, traitor, and worse," shout the crowd. "God have mercy on you all," the priest begins to cry. "I had no hand in it." "Well, now you can add filthy lying to your list of sins. Nicolas never wrote those scurrilous rhymes. He fancied himself a Philippon. He was well known for it." "You are talking of a man you shamed to death. You are a rat." "I demand the right to be heard," the priest shrieks. "And so do I," says the dead man's son, stepping out from the crowd right before the priest, who is now being held by the shoulders by two of the mourners. His coterie are being watched by a semicircle of their colleagues. "I wondered when you would speak, Evariste," says the priest. "Your head is being turned by all these scoundrels." Evariste says nothing, but stares into the eyes of the man of God. "Well, I'm surprised by your silence, young man," the priest says. "The school teacher says you do nothing but shout and screech at him." This was true, of course, and it was beginning to get on Chevalier's nerves. It was also true that now in the higher school some of the professors did understand this wild creature's maths. It was, they were beginning to think, quite remarkable for a young lad who'd only picked up a maths book for the first time 4 years previously. His work is possibly groundbreaking. One of them even used the word genius the other day. But now is not the time for theorising about mathematics. Now is the time for kicking priests in the balls, which he tries to do, but the priest manages to protect himself with one leg, and the scene turns into an ugly farce, with some others landing kicks and others cuffs, and Galois the younger turns and walks away with his back to the scene as he no longer cares what happens to the man he holds responsible for his father's death. His father that is in the cheap coffin there, last seen hanging from the roof beams, like a criminal, while the real criminals are let back into the hen coop, still with blood on their fangs. Curse Charles X, and curse whoever destiny enthrones in his place. May he be the last ever king of France. The mob he leaves behind, meanwhile, having let the sundry choir boys and sexton away with little more than a few kicks up the arse, are now dragging the priest off to his own church for God knows whatever reason. 4 years before, October 1825. The problem is that his attention wanders, the black-cloaked teacher is explaining. The ward looks at him as if not understanding. The child, meanwhile, sits engrossed in a book at the other end of the table. He's picked it off one of the shelves at random and is studying its pages. Either the two adults have not seen him, or they don't care what happens, as they continue to converse about the boy's future, just as before. In small children, the teacher continues his explanation, it is normal. We do what we can to correct it, but young Evariste is, well, not so young now. At 14, we expect to see some signs of maturity. His ward considers this for a moment, nods agreeingly all the while. Then another question. How is it, he begins, how can we prevent a mind from wandering off? The child turns a page. Why have they not shown him this stuff before? There are certain techniques that can be employed, the teacher assures the boy's ward. Correctional techniques, psychological techniques, techniques based on punishment and reward. And which of these techniques do you favour? They all have things to favour them, the professional explains. It very much depends on the nature of the boy. The boy in question turns another page. Over he is, the seasoned old teacher replies. And it is true to say that even if the above techniques are applied, they may sometimes fail. There are boys who simply are not up to the task intellectually. It is a shame, but it seems that God has made him so. God? The ward wonders, with surprise in his voice. Nature, the master corrects himself quickly. I mean it as a figure of speech. I see, of course. In answer to your question, at the moment it is hard to say. Sometimes, when asked for his reasoning, he just stares at the teacher, claiming that the answer is obvious. Well, that is insolent. It is. And other times? Other times he throws tantrums. The child is silent. Follows numbers down the pages. Sees how shapes fit together. Relations, as if in an instant. Meanwhile, in grown-up world, after some more questions and answers, it is finally and gentlemanlily decided that the boy be put on a new, stricter learning regime. He's not altogether a lost cause, they agree, as he shows some natural wit and enthusiasm. The only question is how to awaken it and channel it. Good, the ward concludes, but we must take great care that his energy is channeled in the correct direction. Of course, says the other man. He's already stood up and wants to accompany the lad back to his dorm as soon as possible. It's not his kid after all. Why should he waste so much time on him? Come on, boy, he commands. The boy doesn't hear the first time. Come on. Hey. On repetition, he closes the book and memorises its title so he can take it up again later. Éléments de géométrie by Adrien Marie Legendre. And a key has been turned in a lock and opened up a revolutionary new world to him. And the seeds are sown.